Hello friends, welcome to Dr. Ossai Physiology Academy, DOPA for short. This is the place where we'll make the learning of physiology easy, exciting, and effective. Thank you for joining me. If you're new to this channel, you're especially welcome. And if you love the content that we share, kindly click the like button and also the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so that you don't get to miss any new content that will drop. Now let's get started. So today we're going to be doing endocrine physiology, an introduction to endocrine physiology, and after that we're going to do reproductive physiology. Now, the body has two major ways of communication. One is electrical means, and chemical means, okay, of communication. So this thing has to do with communication basically, but the thing is that electrical, usually it's by nerves and it's faster, while chemical is through what we call chemical messengers. When you talk about general physiology, this thing was introduced about cell signaling and communications. Paracrine communication or signaling, you have the autocrine, you have the neurocrine, and so on and so forth, and you have the endocrine, which communicates through blood. So this is just like wireless communication, okay? So just take this chemical means as the wireless type of communication. So when you're dealing with any topic, always remember purpose. Don't ever forget purpose, because you will derail. Everything becomes disjointed, but the whole body functions as one. Okay, so now the purpose is always to maintain health and for the survival of the organism, and then ultimately reproduction. Okay, so health is related to the concept of homeostasis, which is the foundation of physiology. And to achieve that, the different cells, organs, they need to work together. And several people, for example, they want to work together to achieve a common purpose. There is always communication. So electrical means of communication is dealt with in a part of physiology called sensory physiology, that takes information to the control center. Then motor physiology, that sends command to effectors. Okay, remember the components of control system. So the electrical means nerves, and they always start with receptors. They have their special kinds of receptors, the ones that use electrical means. This chemical means also have their own types of receptors. So the basis, we all learn that in general physiology, cell signaling. So we are building on that endocrine physiology. So now you're going to ask yourself, how does this chemical means of communication, how does it really maintain homeostasis? How? Now, look at what happens. There are so many things that need to be balanced, okay, in the body. For example, temperature is one of them. But somehow temperature is regulated, coordinated through electrical means. We dealt with that under temperature regulation. The lecture is there. Now, why do you need temperature to regulate it? Because enzymes, which helps to catalyze several chemical reactions, and remember, chemical reactions, they are the basis of physiological processes that leads to function. Okay, so temperature affects enzymes because enzymes are proteins. So when the temperature is too high or too low, it will denature the enzyme, the structure of the protein, and it cannot function again. It cannot power the chemical reactions, physiological processes, they come to a halt. So that's why temperature needs to be regulated. pH also needs to regulate because it affects enzymes. So the same thing, these hormones, they also do a regulation of several physiological variables. For example, glucose concentration in the body, it needs to be maintained because it has to do with generation of energy. That ATP that is generated from the mitochondria, everything starts from the breakdown of glucose. So glucose needs to be maintained. So how does body do that? It regulates the level of glucose through a hormone, insulin. We're going to deal with all of them one after the other. For example, another one, calcium. Calcium is another very important chemical substance. Iron, calcium ions in the blood. It needs to be regulated and kept balanced at a stable level. It should not go too high, should not go too low. If it's too high, there's a problem. If it's too low, there's a problem. So what does the body do? There is a hormone that is dedicated to coordinating and regulating the level of calcium. There are some hormones like that, parathyroid hormone. You also have calcitonin, even vitamin D. They help to regulate the level of calcium. So this is what endocrine physiology is all about. Hormones, and then the glands that produce and secrete these hormones and how they are regulated. So this is what we're going to be dealing with in endocrine physiology. So the next thing you're going to ask yourself is, what are those glands? You know that so many cells, they secrete chemical substances. Some are paracrine, but we're not going to be dealing with all of that. You also have GIT hormones that are dedicated to regulating the functions of the gastrointestinal, gastrin, cholecystokinin, and all of that secreting. We learn that in gastrointestinal physiology. So the classical hormones are what we're going to be learning. That's the hormones that are dedicated. They have special glands, very discrete organs and glands that secrete hormones that regulate different things in the body, not just dedicated to just one system like the gastrointestinal hormones. Okay, so the next thing now we're going to be doing, we're going to be mentioning all those hormones. So let's start from the head down. All right, so number one, you have the pituitary hormone gland, the pituitary gland. It has another name, hypophysis. It's also called hypophysis. Now, the pituitary gland is located high up in the head. Very tiny, very small gland when you look at it. The pituitary gland. Okay, we're going to mention the hormones that it secretes. Okay, the pituitary gland is the master gland. It's called the master gland. Why is it called the master gland? Because it helps to stimulate and ginger some other glands to secrete their own hormones. You see, it's not just only secreting its own hormone. The hormones that it secretes stimulate other endocrine glands to secrete their own hormones. So let's mention them. The pituitary gland, we're going to study it specially, but we're just mentioning them right now. About 8 hormones, the pituitary gland. Anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary, secrete different. Let's mention from the posterior part of it, then the anterior part of it. We'll mention them. Now the posterior pituitary has 2 hormones, oxytocin, the female reproductive system, and ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone. It's also known as vasopressin. Has another name, vasopressin. ADH, antidiuretic hormone. It's involved in regulation of water balance and so on in the kidneys. Antidiuretic, diuresis has to do with urination and all of that. So those are the 2 hormones in the posterior part of the pituitary. Then the anterior part has 6 hormones. Now, one of them is prolactin. Has to do with milk secretion. Then you have another one, growth hormone. Deals with growth. Then you have FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, you have LH, luteinizing hormone. I'm not going to deal with all, because specially we're going to deal with them in reproductive system. This one has to do with regulation of reproductive function. Okay, so follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. okay, for reproduction especially. Then you also have another one, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Then you have another one, thyroid stimulating hormone, which means that it stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete its own hormone. That's why it's called thyroid stimulating hormone. So these are the hormones: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the anterior and 2 for the posterior. 8 hormones, just one gland. All right, so that is for the pituitary gland. Now let's go to number 2. You come down a little bit, you find the thyroid gland around the neck. So you have the thyroid gland, okay, secretes thyroid hormone, thyroxine. Then another one called iodothyronine. They have their own nicknames. This one is known as T4. This one is known as T3. Right. So next, number 3, you have parathyroid. Okay, a similar name, parathyroid glands. Okay, the parathyroid gland, they are involved in calcium homeostasis. They are the ones that regulate this calcium levels. Okay, so the parathyroid gland secretes parat hormone. We call it parat hormone or parathyroid hormone, short form parat hormone, PTH for short. Okay, so from the neck, we're done with that. You now come down and you find another gland. You'll be surprised, pancreas. You know, the pancreas deals with a lot of the pancreas has to do with the GIT, but that part is called exocrine part of the pancreas. It's a gland. So this exocrine it secretes its substances through ducts. Okay, but endocrine is ductless, secretes directly into the blood, ductless. Okay, so you have the exocrine part of the pancreas, which occupies a larger part. Then you have the endocrine part. Okay, so you can put it here, endocrine pancreas, to differentiate it from the exocrine pancreas. And it secretes insulin and glucagon. They help to regulate this glucose. Okay, so lastly, we have another major classical gland with classical hormones. Okay, you have the adrenal gland. Adrenal. You know, when you talk about renal, the kidneys. So ad is on top. They're just located on top of the kidney. So adrenal is also called suprarenal because on top of the kidneys. Okay, suprarenal gland. So you say, what does it secrete? They have different regions. You have the cortex and the medulla. So the cortical part of it, the cortex of the adrenal gland, they secrete mainly what we call mineralocorticoids. Then you have glucocorticoids. Okay, that's the cortex. The cortex of it. So this mineralocorticoid, mainly aldosterone. Aldosterone plays a role in the kidneys too. Seems like its brother, the ADH. Okay, then glucocorticoids. The classical one there is cortisol. Okay, then the medulla of the adrenal gland. Okay, medulla. Let's write it somewhere here. The medulla, adrenal medulla. That's where you might have heard of this adrenaline. You've heard of adrenaline, but you usually call it epinephrine. Epinephrine. And its brother, you add nor to it. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay? They have similar function with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Just that their own is through hormones in a slower process, while sympathetic nerve, okay, through electrical means, but they have similar function. In emergency situations, they control all of that. So these are the classical glands and the classical hormones. So next, we're going to be dealing with how you classify hormones. We're going to be dealing with that. Don't go anywhere after this break. Right here, welcome back. So now we're going to be focusing on classification of hormones. It's very simple. Okay, so hormones can be classified in two ways. One of them is according to their chemical structure. You know, their chemicals, so they have a structure according to their chemical structure. Number two, according to their solubility in aqueous solution. Say aqueous, aqua, water. Okay, according to how, whether it's water soluble or not water soluble. So now let us start with this. According to their chemical structure, you have three types. One of them, you have peptide hormones. Peptide. You can also call them protein hormones, or usually just stick to peptide hormones. Okay, of course you know that they are synthesized from amino acids, peptide hormones. And peptide, protein, it's easy to know the hormones that are peptide hormones. So how do we know them? The glands, their initials start from P. Pituitary hormones. Pituitary hormones, for example, oxytocin, growth hormone, and so on. They are all peptide hormones. Then you have parathyroid. Parathyroid hormone is also a protein peptide hormone. Then you have pancreas, that's insulin, glucagon. They are also peptide. So you can, in fact, most hormones are peptide hormones. Then which other P do we have? These are the three major P's. Then there's another one too, placenta. Though we don't usually, because placenta is not irregular, it's just in women. Okay, but you can add this one, P, another P, placenta hormones. Placenta also secretes this, the next one we're going to mention, but it's part of what it secretes. The hormones it secretes, they are peptides hormones. Okay, so number two, you have steroid hormones. Steroid is telling you that they are synthesized from cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol has its definition, has a steroid nucleus. So examples of steroid hormones, you have something like estrogen, which is a reproductive hormone. Estrogen, testosterone, sterone. You have progesterone, and so on and so forth. Okay, and some others that we're going to be dealing with as we go ahead. Steroid hormones. Then another one, the third major type according to chemical structure, is amines or amines. They're also synthesized. They're synthesized from amino acids. Okay, it's just that the way they are synthesized, there's hydroxylation and decarboxylation involved that now yields amines. Okay, so an example: norepinephrine and epinephrine. There's a name we call them, those two hormones. We call them catecholamines. Catecholamines. Okay, catechol and amines. Catecholamines. That's norepinephrine and epinephrine. Then you also have the thyroxine, thyroid hormones. They are amines too. They are synthesized from the amino acid called tyrosine. Okay, so thyroid hormones, they are amines, and all of them, catecholamines, thyroid hormones, they are synthesized from tyrosine, and some others too are synthesized from tryptophan. Okay, but those ones, they are not among the classical hormones. For example, you have melatonin, you have serotonin, okay, tryptophan, so on. But these are from the classical hormones, these two, catecholamines, thyroid hormones, tyrosine. Okay, so these are the three major classes according to chemical structure. Then according to solubility, you have, of course, you have the water soluble and lipid soluble. Now there's an implication of this. The water soluble, all peptide hormones, okay, now you see them, pituitary, parathyroid, they are all water soluble. They dissolve in the bloodstream. They easily dissolve in the bloodstream. And two key facts that you need to know about these water soluble hormones, which a lot of them are peptide hormones. Then in this amines, catecholamines are also water soluble, but thyroid hormones are not. Okay, so just all peptides, then the catecholamines of the amines. Okay, so just note that. So say there are two facts. One of them is that these hormones, they are not synthesized initially in their final form. You have what we call pre-pro hormone. This is how the endoplasmic reticulum initially synthesizes them. Pro hormone. So before it becomes active, it will first of all cleave something, and this processing happens, of course, in the Golgi apparatus. That's where processing of substances they happen. So it will remove it, this pre, it will become pro hormone. Then later remove some units from it, some substances from the pro, then before it now becomes a full hormone. Okay, and they are stored in secretory vesicles. That means they are already prepared and stored in vesicles even before they are needed, before they are stimulated to be secreted. They are already stored, prepared, waiting. Okay, so it makes the onset of action of these hormones very fast. So it has a rapid onset of action. That means once they are stimulated, because they are already prepared, they are easily secreted through exocytosis, because they cannot cross through the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. So through exocytosis, they are secreted. So another thing is that because they are water soluble, they dissolve in the blood plasma, which is a lot of water there. They are easily excreted. Okay, so they have a short duration of action. Note these two things. Because they are water soluble, they have a rapid onset of action, and short duration of action. Okay, because they are easily excreted, because they are so. But lipid soluble hormones, because they cannot dissolve in water, they will precipitate in blood. So for them to be successfully carried through the bloodstream, they need to bind to what? Plasma proteins. Of course, albumin, most abundant plasma. They bind to plasma proteins, albumin, and some other plasma proteins with special names. When we are dealing with them individually, we'll mention all of them. Okay, so before they can be transported in the blood, they bind to plasma proteins, and because of that, they have a long duration of action. They are not easily excreted. Then also, because they are not stored in secretory vesicles like the water soluble, once they are secreted, they just pass through the cell membrane. Because they are lipid soluble, they can easily pass through the cell membrane. Okay, so that's why they don't need to be stored before they are secreted. So they have a slow onset of action and long duration of action. So those are key things you need to know when you are thinking about their solubility. Okay, so that is what you need to know basically about classification of hormones. Hope it's clear, easy stuff. So the details, you're going to get it in your textbook. I have a textbook on endocrine physiology. All right, so the details are all there. So we're going to see you in the part 2 of still the introduction to endocrine physiology, because there's some things we're going to be learning about the mechanism of hormonal action. So see you in the next video.